is Eleonora Sammartino from the University of Greenwich and Reading and Imperial College London. Her presentation is titled Let's Hear It for the Boy, Masculinity and Nostalgia in the Remake of 1980s Teen Musicals. Eleonora Sammartino is a visiting lecturer in film at the University of Greenwich, University of Reading and Imperial College London. Her research focuses on the American film musical, feminisms in popular media, and the relationship between stardom and the cultural politics of identity. Her work features in the European Journal of American Studies, the Journal of Italian Cinema and Media Studies, and upcoming collections like Musicals at the Margins, edited by Julie LaBalzo-Wright and Martha Shearer. She's currently co-editing with Alex Gilley a special issue on Hugh Grant for the Celebrity Studies Journal. Sounds awesome. So when you're ready, Eleonora, I'll let you go ahead and share your screen.
Francis, let me know if you can see this. All right. So, all right. Okay, so let's read For the Boy, Masculinity and Nostalgia in the Remake of 1980s Teen Musicals. In her analysis of the Hollywood musical, Jane Fuhrer affirms the materials with which musical entertainment builds change across time, but the process of nostalgia for the old and mystification of the new never changes. Musicals are rerun, reissued, remade, and revived. The contemporary musical still partakes in this process, as in a series of remakes of 1980s teen musicals emerged since the late 2000s, such as Fame, Footloose, and Dirty Dancing. Konstantin Verevis underlines that, much like genre, remakes are the byproduct of discursive practices based on the repetition and variation of generic conventions, in which the specific genre represents the old text. Comparably, Svetlana Boym describes nostalgia as being founded on, quote, the repetition of the unrepeatable, unquote, in the attempt to reach back to times and spaces that cannot be materialized anymore. In this paper, I will explore the connection between genre and nostalgia in contemporary musical remakes through the case of Footloose. The comparative analysis between the original film and the remake will highlight how, in nostalgically referencing the 1984 Footloose, the use of musical numbers constructs the maturing masculinity of the protagonist in fluid terms, also informed by the hybridization with the teen film. Through the examination of the relationship between music and narrative, I will further demonstrate the foregrounding of family discourses that draw parallels between the conservatism of the Reagan era and a post-recessionary context, in particular through the adoption of a post-feminist fatherhood. Thomas Leach emphasizes that references to the original text and reworking of key elements are essential in pleasing the incompatible audiences of remakes, satisfying the expectations of those familiar with the original, while also letting new audiences enjoy the films. The remake of Footloose employs the same story and characters of his predecessor, with minimal changes. Protagonist Ren, a teenager from Chicago, now from Boston in the remake, moves in with his uncle in Beaumont, relocated from Utah to Georgia, where rock music and dance are forbidden by the law after a car crash killed the son of Reverend Moore. In love with Moore's daughter Ariel, he decides to fight the town council to throw a prom dance. Not only nostalgia plays a key role for audiences familiar with the original, but also for new ones. Kathleen Luke includes Footloose in a cycle of 1980s retro remakes that have emerged in Hollywood between 2006 and 2009 and have continued to proliferate throughout the next decade. In this cycle, the immediate pastness of the 1980s is made recognizable and distinctive through codes as a form of prosthetic memory produced by mass media representation rather than lived experience. Semantic elements like costumes, locations, signature dialogue, and the soundtrack are employed to produce a retro-sensibility, engendering additional forms of pleasure for the audience, as you can see here from a few examples, including a quite new board game that takes the title sequence with the shoes as its characteristic retro look there. Among these elements, the soundtrack is particularly relevant to the analysis of the musical genre. The remake features new country-inflected tracks to better reflect the move of the action to Georgia, but also relies consistently on many of the hits from the 1984 film, either in their original version or in updated covers, such as Holding Out for a Hero by Bonnie Tyler. The use of the compilation score is significant in this sense, as unknown pop hits bring a built-in obsolescence to the film because of their connections with particular socio-historical contexts and their specificity in sound and style, as Jeff Smith underlines. These associations can also produce what Anahir Kastabian calls affiliating identifications, a type of engagement that gives filmgoers a degree of mobility thanks to their personal extratextual meanings that they bring to the film. In this case, the affiliating identification is doubly linked to the use of songs in Footloose, whose positioning in the remake can bring pleasure to audiences familiar with the original, who can recognize the same position of the song and the similar use, as well as to the songs themselves as hits from the 1980s, accessible to new audiences of the film. The nostalgia linked to music is further exposed by the use of obsolete reproduction technologies in the remake. The numbers often originate from a diegetic source on which the camera lingers, boomboxes, CD players, and turntables alongside iPods. For instance, when Ren first moves to Beaumont, he finds a stack of vinyls in the garage, including Quiet Riot's Mental Health, a single first released in 1983 and also featuring in Footloose. Rather than putting on the record, however, Ren finds the song on his iPod, selecting it from his own playlist. Whereas analog apparatuses might seem obsolete to a contemporary audience, the iPod is still relatively new, with sales soaring in 2005. Yet, as Simon Reynolds highlights, ubiquitous Wi-Fi and smartphones made the idea of a transportable universal library and the iPod already obsolete by 2011, when the film was released. The presence of Quiet Riot's song on Ren's iPod is also significant. As Michael Bull underlines, the songs of the device have been pre-selected by the subject and stored there because connected with a memory, representing a micromanagement of nostalgia. Not only the soundtrack evokes a sense of nostalgia for the audience then, but also for the characters in the narrative, playing a key role in their identity formation through where generic conventions are also negotiated in the hybridization with the teen film. Youthful protagonists, heterosexual romance, the control of adolescence by institutions like the family or the school, and coming-of-age stories that feature graduation, makeovers, and virginity are the key conventions of the teen film outlined by Catherine Driscoll. The negotiation of homosocial friendships is also highlighted by David Revan as marking the maturation into American manhood in early 2000 teen comedies. These kinds of bonds are usually characterized by a shared intimacy in all male places, often tinted by homosexual undertones that need to be relegated to this separate sphere to allow the development of a successful heterosexual relationship. In both versions of Footloose, Ren matures into an adult masculinity through the prom dance, a ritual that marks this passage by asserting social success in connection with heterosexual coupling as an imperative of heteronormative masculinity, as well as by challenging the town council, an institution that stands for adulthood itself. The opposition between teens and adults is predicated especially upon the use of musical numbers as part of the teenagers' realm from which the adults are excluded. In the process, the affect of the music is foregrounded through its effect, like energy, a sense of community, and the expression of emotions conveyed through dancing. On the other hand, scenes featuring interactions between teens and adults are part of the narrative, usually underscored by non-diegetic instrumental music, which can only hint to the emotions and mood of the characters rather than directly expressing them through motion. Dance fundamentally contributes to the construction of masculinity in Footloose, where it is directly connected to homosocial relationships. Red manages to assert his gendered identity through an athletic style of dance, maturing into adulthood and achieving heterosexual coupling. For these reasons, he is taken as a model by his friend Willard, who instead cannot dance. However, dance is attributed different meanings in the two films, as shown in a sequence wherein the teenagers go to a honky-tonk. And here, the top part of the slide is from the original Footloose, while the bottom one is from the remake. In the original, Willard is sitting at a table with a restless Rusty, his love interest, looking out on the dance floor where Ren and Ariel are dancing in a close embrace. In the remake, the first part of the sequence focuses on Ren, Ariel, and Rusty all line dancing. Only later, Willard is shown taking pleasure from their fun. While dancing is a means for romance in the original, in the remake, it is seen primarily as a desirable activity through which Willard can assert his masculinity. This is further exposed in the montage edited over Denise Williams, Let's Hear It for the Boy, showing Willard's training as a dancer in both versions. The original song is used in the remake, emerging from a Barbie boombox at the start of the sequence, as Ren's little cousins sing along to it, gesturing toward the extra textual popularity of the song. The nostalgia evoked through the song, the obsolete reproduction technology, and quite interestingly also connected to childhood here, as well as similarities in editing and location, contributes to the negotiation of masculinity and homosexuality through dance. In the original, Ren is the only teacher and spectator of Willard's dancing, excepted for a very brief shot with his cousins. Instead, in the remake, Ren is helped by the little girls and Woody and his friends who act as breakdancing instructors for Willard. Still, the attention is mostly on Willard and Ren in both cases, showing Willard copying his movements until he manages to dance on his own. The training also happens in masculine places like the basketball court or the football field, in addition to Willard's farm and Ren's backyard, and is often interrupted by engagement in masculine activities like wrestling. The confinement of their relationship to a separate sphere seemingly deflects homosexual subtext, as Greven asserts. However, the prom dance at the end of the film privileges Ren and Willard as they dance in a mix of breakdancing and country style at the center of the dance floor, as all the others make room for them, especially in the original when Ren and Ariel are not seen together. While the remake plays with Julianne Hough's extra textual popularity as a dancer by giving her a solo and having Ariel and Ren dancing together, the couple is seen only very briefly, lost among all the other dancers on the floor. Thus, the ending further supports the centrality of the relationship between Ren and Willard, potentially opening up the text to queer readings. And it is quite significant because traditionally the last number in musicals is dedicated to the celebration of the heterosexual couple, which is here in a way undercut by the film. As characteristic of teen film, both Footloose also feature a struggle against institutions, enabling the entrance into a different social status. In the domestic sphere, this struggle emerges through the symbolic father-son relationships in the films. Yet some significant differences between the two versions reflect the change towards post-feminist fatherhood in contemporary society, as argued by Hannah Hammond. This new model of fatherhood, which emerged as a response to second-wave feminism and its request for equality even in the private sphere, is framed as an ideal masculinity in contemporary American culture, characterized by emotional articulacy and a certain expertise in the domestic realm, especially with children. Masculinity is brought back to the center of the narrative through the marginalization of motherhood and the consequent characterization of the single father as victim, further stressed by the adoption of a melodramatic mode in film. Michael Kimmel also traces this rearticulation of hegemonic manhood as an alternative to the angry white man that values fatherhood as a means of accepting gender equality both in the public and the private spheres. In the original, Ren explains to his mother that the absence of his father motivates his actions, wanting to achieve something to be proud of instead of feeling worthless through his fight for the dance. Ren's uncle represents another negative model who constantly accuses his nephew about breaking rules and publicly antagonizes him. On the other hand, Reverend Moore at first comes across as angry during his sermons and mostly concerned with the moral values of his community, although he seems to actually care for his family and shows compassion for people in the community. His inability to talk to Ariel because of his failure to deal with the grief over the loss of his son is finally overcome thanks to Ren and Mrs. Moore. After talking to Ren about his son and giving his blessing for the dance, Shaw makes peace with Ariel, hugging his daughter and admitting his mistakes, as you can see here in the the top right. Both of them are framed in medium close-ups, surrounded by a warm light until the final shot where they're both in the frame. This newfound bond is underlined by the use of non-diegetic instrumental music, which bridges the scene with the next one when Shaw identifies himself as a father rather than a pastor during one of his sermons. This scene doubles an earlier one in the other screen grab, in which Ariel repeatedly tries to start a conversation with her father to no avail. The use of a highly contrasted light and a racking focus creates a distance between the two, echoed by the diegetic piece of music by classic composer Haydn, appreciated by Shaw but unknown to Ariel, which fills the silence between the two, highlighting by contrast the tension in the room. Therefore, the formal differences between the two scenes signal a positive development in their relationship. Key changes in the remake contribute to the emergence of a different kind of fatherhood in the film. Wren's mother is eliminated from the plot, having just died of cancer, motivating the move to Beaumont and his feeling of uselessness. This is functional to the foregrounding of fatherhood, further supported by the nearly silent roles of Wren's aunt and Mrs. Moore. The role of Uncle Wes benefits from this, becoming a positive father figure for Wren, as he openly supports him in his fight for the prom dance. Reverend Moore also represents a different model of fatherhood. He is introduced soon after his son's death through a speech in which he emphasizes his role as a father, talking of his only son, even though Ariel is just there and he completely ignores her. As a melodramatic music plays, the camera stays on his close-up, highlighting Quaid's performance as he speaks with a broken voice and glistening eyes. By setting his first speech at a town meeting rather than in church, fatherhood is immediately cast as a defining element of a civic masculinity rather than a spiritual life. Whereas in the original, Moore is presented as an angry preacher, here he is a vulnerable father, and even after this prologue, his sermons mostly expose his conservatism rather than anger, which he also demonstrates through his more active part in the regulation of Ariel's behavior throughout the film. Ultimately, his grieving fatherhood is evidenced in a scene with Wren towards the end, when the teen goes to ask for his blessing. The emotional core of the scene is a comparison between their different kinds of grief for a son and for a mother respectively, rather than acceptance from an adult figure or forgiveness from a daughter. This displacement of the daughter with a substitute for the lost son demonstrates the importance of father-son relationships and more generally of the interactions between male characters in the remake. Only before the prom, Shaw finally manages to talk to Ariel. Significantly, an instrumental cover version of Holding Out for a Hero plays throughout the scene. The song, so far associated with Wren in the film, creates a further connection between him and Moore, confirmed as it continues to play in the following scene when Wren comes to pick up Ariel. Shaw himself then becomes the hero for Ariel, but this has been made possible only thanks to Wren, who will substitute the father in her life, perpetuating a traditional patriarchal structure. The nostalgia evoked by the music thus exposes the longing for a more traditional socio-political formation. The importance of the family in both films allows a parallel to be drawn between the 80s and the noughties. Starting from the mid-70s, the discourse of the family has been central to the populism of the new right in an attempt to return to a more traditional model, while blaming independent women and intellectual liberals for their moral laxity. In this context, women are completely dedicated to the family and defined by motherhood. The solution to 1917 masculine weakness, between quotes, came in the image of Reagan, that Reagan projected of himself as, quote, a real man and a real president, unquote, to which fatherhood was central. This response to second wave feminism and to the Vietnam War is mirrored in the reaction to 9/11 described by Susan Faludi, particularly in the backlash against women. The terrorist attack was seen as an emasculation of the nation, with women's independence considered as one of its main causes. The answer to this has been an attempt to recuperate a traditional masculine model and the immediate silencing of women in the media. Such a gendered polarization has been further exacerbated in post-recessionary culture, in which, as Tasker and Negra highlight, the rhetoric of masculinity in crisis has been deployed to position men as victims of the economic downturn, privileging economic austerity over gender equality. The region of Footloose overtly represents the populism of the new right through the example of Wren's uncle and Roger, the headmaster, respectively at home through the policing of viewing habits and behaviors, and in the community through censorship. This is echoed in the remake by Roger, who best exemplifies the return to a hard masculinity, while women are mostly silenced. However, in both versions, while still campaigning for a more conservative value, Shaw emerges as comparatively more emotionally literate thanks to his role as a father, increasingly so in the remake where his vulnerability is exposed. Yet the embrace of a post-feminist fatherhood still represents the assertion of a hegemonic masculine model to the detriment to gender equality. Perhaps not coincidentally, the accident that leads to the ban of music and dancing in the remake's timeline coincides with the Great Recession, which is also used to justify Uncle Wes's financial problems. So to conclude, in the process of remaking, nostalgia emerges as fundamental to the reworking of generic conventions and the construction of masculinity. While music and dance characteristic of the musical open up the remake to queer readings, before grounding homosocial relations over heterosexual romance, the narrative instead negotiates the opposition between teens and adults, wherein family discourses are foregrounded. In a parallel between the Reagan era and the post-recessionary culture, the mass-mediated nostalgia employed in the film also speaks to a reconfiguration of hegemonic masculinities that seems to undercut the work of the musical. Thank you.